Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Datapalooza 2017. Thank you for being here on such a cold morning. My name's Phil Bourne. I'm the director of the Data Science Institute here. This is my first Datapalooza. How many of you here is it your first Datapalooza? Oh, there's quite a lot of old hands as well. Okay, great. Well, thank you for coming again. So let me just sort of set the stage for what we're going to be doing here. And really just sort of introduce the sort of concept. I mean, we're here because I think our society is going through a pretty profound change that's driven by data and data analytics. And we're going to see, I think, from my point of view, we're really very much at the early stage of that. And we're really here to celebrate the positive aspects of what's going on in that with respect to data science and data analytics. So we're going to hear a whole variety of different examples of that. We're here to sort of really, just celebrate that. And the event is sponsored by the Data Science Institute and also the Office of the Vice President for Research and the Office of the Vice President for Information Technology. So the Data Science Institute is relatively new. You'll hear from the founder, Don Brown, in a little while. And we're essentially trying to create an ecosystem across the grounds here at UVA to support all this data analytics efforts that's going on. When we describe it in various ways, one way we describe it is it's sort of where the academical village meets Google. It's really trying to bring together students, faculty, and the private sector into a set of activities around data. It doesn't necessarily exist in its own right. It's here really to use data and analytics to create these connections across the various disciplines that we support here. It's something that's actually in full-fledged sort of expansion mode. We're in the process, and there's a hint in here, we're in the process of hiring staff, faculty into the DSI. And so if you know people or you're interested in it yourself, please reach out to us while you're here today. We're also in the process of hiring a Wikimedian to work with us in the library. It's just one example of a sort of cross-disciplinary type of activity. So if you know of someone or you're interested in that. And we're expanding our programs, again, in collaboration with the 11 schools here, our educational program. We already have an active Master of Science program of data science. Many of the students are here this morning for that. They got off their ethics class to come for this. And they don't look too disappointed, I have to say. That's expanding. We have dual degree programs with nursing, with the School of Medicine, and with the Darden School of Business. So these are just things. We have plans for a PhD program, plans to expand our research activities beyond the capstone projects, many of which are done with industry, and also our Presidential Fellows program, which brings graduate students from across the grounds together. So all of these things are going on in this very vibrant ecosystem, and you'll hear a lot about that today. But we couldn't have a day like this without actually collecting data at the same time. It's not on the screen right now, but in fact there's some ugly thing on the screen. But anyway, there is an app. Sorry, it's not an app, it's a web page that you can go to, which will appear on the screen, I hope, shortly. And you can, the process to follow is as follows. I've got my cheat sheet here, so I better get it right. Of course, I've lost that already. Oh, it fell down. Thank you, Tom. Thank heavens we have an Eiffel provost. What can I say? So on the back of your name tag, please fill that out when you leave, and leave that at the registration desk. And you can plot your connections throughout the day. So on your badge, you have a number. That's your de-identified self. And so when people talk to you, they can punch that number into the web page and it will create a connection. Those will obviously form edges on a network. And there is a wonderful prize, an Amazon Echo for the person who comes up with the most connections during the day. We'll measure that on the network. So, of course, there's no gaming of the system. We'll be looking out for that. But and anyway, please enjoy it. So that's really all I'll say at the beginning. I now want to introduce our provost, Tom Katsidis, who will give a few opening remarks. And I must say, Tom has been a wonderful partner, first to Don Brown, who you'll hear from in a minute, but also to me now as the director of the DSI, in really helping us move forward in this vibrant way that I described to you. So thank you very much, and thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Phil. I'm really glad to be here. I'm really glad to get the free swag. And I think there was a message in this. Phil asked me not to make any flippant remarks, but too late. So it's very exciting for me to be at Datapalooza. I'm excited about data science and our Data Science Institute, for which this has become an annual signature program. The Data Science Institute serves to connect researchers and expand our intellectual footprint in data sciences nationally and internationally. Through the DSI, UVA is looking to forge a unique path among a crowded field of top universities who are also seeing the importance of this expanding field for education and society. We are doing that by collaborating more broadly across the disciplines, ranging from engineering to music, medicine to politics. We're doing that by bringing to bear the talents of an entire university in our first Pan-University Institute. And we're doing that through the exceptional leadership of our new director, Phil Bourne, who is nationally renowned himself for conceiving and launching the NIH's BD2K, Big Data to Knowledge, as well as his own data research. We're doing that by launching novel educational programs, such as the one that Phil mentioned, our MS in Data Science, which was ranked number 6 in US News and World Report in its first 18 months and continues to be nationally acclaimed. Through the DSI, researchers are working together and using big data to solve sticky problems we face in our communities, locally, nationally, and around the world. And I'd like to share with you a few examples. This is one of my favorite parts of being provost, is to be able to tell the stories of our incredible, talented researchers and students. So the first one is presidential fellows and PhD candidates, Colin Kilty from politics and Anup Gampa from psychology. We're using big data to discover how people interact politically online and whether we were able to escape social media echo chambers. We've all been there. And second example from the same cohort, presidential fellows Lynn Bai, a PhD student in robotics automation and dance, and the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering, and John Bologna, an intermediate artist and composer and a PhD student in composition and computer technologies in the Department of Music, worked together to make robots more expressive and relatable to humans. Peter Oakes, a professor in the Department of Religion and Computer Science, and professor of, in the Department of Religion, and computer science professor Don Brown, collaborating on mining social media to predict and prevent religious violence. Fourth example, John Locke in electrical and computer engineering, collaborating with Virginia LeBaron in the School of Nursing on a project on pain management. And finally, recent recruit Jay Ambati in the School of Medicine, who's one of the world's leading experts on age-related macular degeneration. So this is a form of blindness that afflicts 30 million people around the world. And by applying machine learning techniques to medical system data, discovered that HIV patients who were on antiretroviral therapy never got AMD. So that gave profound insight into the mechanisms and possible treatments of AMD for the rest of society. So these are just a few of the exciting examples of things going on here in DSI. I'm proud to support DSI and look forward to the amazing synergies that will come next. I also feel lucky to have such a great team here at UVA with Phil Bourne at the helm. He's been a terrific addition to our team, as well as the continued support of DSI founding director Don Brown. Don did an amazing job getting the DSI up and running, and we're excited for his continued involvement and leadership. Again, thank you for having me, and yowza, let's have a heck of a Datapalooza. Good morning.
Morning. My name is Don Brown. I'm the founding director of the Data Science Institute, and I'm really happy. This is not my first Datapalooza. This actually is number 3 for me, and they are fantastic events. If you haven't been to one before, they're really exciting, and I'm looking forward to this one. This is, well, I'm looking forward to having Phil run this one, actually. So this is it's a very exciting time. And as Phil said, you know, we've got this nice little thing where we're going to be collecting data during the day. There's absolutely no gaming of it, but just note that you're listening to 418 right now, so go ahead and enter that in. All right, I don't see anybody typing it in. Let's get... Okay, well, it's my pleasure this morning to introduce our plenary speaker, John Elder. John founded a company here in 1995, Elder Research Incorporated. It has grown now significantly. They have offices in Maryland, D.C., and North Carolina. John is the author of 3 books on data mining, ensembles, and text mining, 2 of which have won major book awards during the year. He's done a lot of really neat research over the years in data mining. He's been very much a leader in this area. I've got to say, he's actually a UVA alum. He graduated with his PhD from systems engineering here, and he did really good work. His work was on, his PhD work was on developing a new approach to searching, to optimizing the fit of data to new mathematical models. And it was a really nice piece of work. He only made 2 mistakes, and I've got to point those out. The first one was the naming of his algorithm. His algorithm is called the grope algorithm. So I'm just saying, don't go to John to ask for the name of your new algorithm, okay? The other mistake he made was he chose as his advisor this young, brash, sort of stubborn, determined, hard to work with associate professor at, here, which made his life miserable for the time he was working on the PhD, and that person was me. So please join me in welcoming my former student, John Elder.
That's great. I must hurry to point out that global RD optimization when probes are expensive is what GROPE stood for. So there was a real reason. But that wasn't as bad as Leo Bryman's. Leo Bryman is a great, he's unfortunately passed away, introduced a lot of wonderful things like CART and bagging. But one of his that didn't take off was the product integration method for probability likelihood estimation. So work that one out. Yeah, that one did not take off. Am I going with this, or should I turn something on? Alrighty, so whoa, all right. I am going good stream now. It's great to be here. In my bio, I intentionally added something too that they dropped off for some reason. I don't know why. That 40% of my children are current Wahoos, so I'm really proud of that. So, and one of them may be here or not. I'm not sure. So, but I told her food was available, so that might have made the difference. So anyway, it's great to be here. It's really exciting that the institute has grown so and has doing such great work. We're 100% of the folks that we've hired from it have worked out great for us, so that's a good sign. And really seeing Charlottesville as a regional powerhouse in the field of data science. You know, it's really a wonderful place to live, and it's great to have this here. There's a number of startups in the area. The University Hospital is doing a lot more than most hospitals in the area of data science. We've got some great representatives from that group here, and so there's just a lot going on, and Don's company has been active for a long time in using data science and doing some great work, and so there's a great history here, and things are really set to take off. So it's wonderful to see that going on. I kind of wanted to bring the industrial perspective, and it's obvious to see there's some companies completely built around data, the Facebooks and the Googles and so forth of the world, that wouldn't exist if it weren't for data. In fact, they're creating new data, which creates a fantastic resource that everyone's interested. I mean, you know, a decade ago, who would have thought you could have, or maybe a little longer now, who would have thought you could know what every single person wants? You know, but now Google gives you a view to that, and I highly recommend the book Everyone Lies, Everybody Lies, which is a New York Times writer, former Google engineer, who has analyzed a lot of Google searches, because Google searches are a lot more honest than survey answers. You don't have that social acceptability bias when you're answering a question, when you're Googling something. So that even though it's anonymous, they can look at areas and they can map who's looking up certain things and how that relates to voting patterns or violence or all sorts of interesting things, as well as telling us rather disturbing things about ourselves. But anyway, the new sources of data are phenomenal and everything. But what I want to focus on today is the old school companies that are taking advantage of data science. So the companies, the bricks and mortars, the companies that have been around a long time, they're being revolutionized by their use of analytics. And it's a slow process. We've been in business 22 years, and you know, it was a bit of a hard sell in the early days. You're doing what, and what's it for? And now it's everywhere, and it's almost harder in some cases now, because in the old days, you just had to you know, convince an early adopter is fun to work for. You know, they'll believe you, and if you haven't quite done that same exact project before, they like it. But now it's like, you know, somebody's looking for fraud detection in car insurance subrogation problems, and they're like, well, we've worked in car insurance, we've worked on subrogation, we've worked on insurance, we've done a lot with fraud detection, but we've never done all of those together. And like, I should call somebody else. I'm like, what? You know, the wonderful, wonderful thing about this field is you get to be useful everywhere. You get to do everything. You get to be a tinker, tailor, soldier, spy. You get to be on Wall Street. You get to help with national security. You get to help with insurance. You get to help with law enforcement. You get to help with drug discovery. I mean, the things that you could possibly work with are phenomenal, because when you break it down and everything's data, and it doesn't mean that you can do it without cooperation. In fact, one of the major themes is you have to work very closely with folks that know what's going on, that know the old way of doing things, that know the details, that are the domain experts. And you also run a huge danger of not having your work implemented if you haven't done that. So that's another lesson I hope to go over. Well, let me dive in. What I want to talk about is a little bit about the AI, data mining, machine learning. You know, fields are very much overhyped, but they're also very much overlapping. But there's a lot of great, awesome reality there, and so I'm basically saying we don't need the hype. Let's be very careful about what our claims are. IBM, to name names. Anyway, and then we have all these wonderful inductive modeling methods to work with, which is the best. I want to talk about 5 key projects over the last 20 years, investment timing being one of them, and what are using those as excuses to talk about some of the techniques that proved very extremely useful in solving that problem. So, you know, they say necessity is a mother of invention, and some people say, yeah, necessity is a mother. All right, but anyway, no. But you know, the great thing about working with real life problems is you run into certain sorts of situations that you might not have thought about in academia, and it leads to a new formulation or a new idea, because you have to solve the problem, and that pressure and deadline, I find, is extremely helpful in terms of getting something done and sometimes inventing something new. So we'll look at credit scoring, drug discovery, health assessment, and gas and oil production or exploration. So a lot of really interesting areas. One area that we would do a lot of work in is fraud. I want to say we're against it, by the way. But I didn't have a real neat technology to add to that. But I did want to tell 1 or 2 stories from the anti-fraud world. One thing is that a lot of times people who are our clients are a little worried that when you come in and you automate and improve the efficiency of something, you're going to reduce staff. Now, a company might not be so worried about that, because that leads to great savings and costs, but a government agency might be, because they've spent a long time building up their fiefdom, and they certainly also, from a personal standpoint, they care about the families that are supported by that group and so forth. If you come in and suddenly do everything much more efficiently, what's going to happen to their people, and what's going to happen to their importance also? And these things might not even be conscious, but but in every single case that we've done work, it's led to a growth of the group. You're like, whoa, what's going on? Well, what happens is now their effectiveness is tripled, and so they're given a larger mandate. If they solve the first problem, or if they go as deep as they can in that first problem, they're said, well, now you can do this problem that we've never looked at before, and this one. And so in all the commercial and government activities where we've gone in, the introduction of data science and the improved efficiency and return on investment has led to a growth in the group. So that's actually quite exciting to reveal that as one of the stumbling blocks that doesn't really exist. Another thing is the return on investment can be enormous. We did a lot of work, anti-fraud work for the IRS. Now, don't anybody quail here. It was for basically against organized crime. Organized crime finds it easy to fabricate individuals and go after things like the Earned Income Tax Credit, which has a very low hurdle to getting in there, which is a good program because it offers sort of half welfare for people that are leaving welfare to take entry-level jobs, which compared to welfare is not that great a trade-off, but the half welfare helps make it a good trade-off. Well, organized crime goes after that and steals billions of dollars from us taxpayers. The model that originated there had a high false alarm rate, 99 out of 100 times when it would signal something is unusual about this return, and it was investigated, it would turn out to be okay. Well, a 1% hit rate is much better than the natural fraud rate in the data, but it's still just too unwieldy for actual use. But we were able to improve that model 25-fold to where 1 in 4 of the things flagged were actual fraud. So that model has been credited with, a few years ago, and so the number's even higher now, a few years ago that model was credited with saving $7 billion opposed to what was gone before. Now, they didn't pay anywhere near that much for the model, so the return on investment was quite high. Another problem with, another story I want to relate related to fraud detection is we did some work for the Defense Finance and Accounting Service in San Diego, and they were a good client, but they kept saying they had, one thing about people with data mining is you need data. And they said, oh yeah, we have data, we have fraud data. And they were looking for contract fraud, people who were doing government contracts and defrauding the government. The problem was they had no known examples of that in their data set. They had fraud, but it was government employees who had committed fraud. They had 13 cases of fraud, 12 of whom were government employees who had turned themselves in. So we were really good at building models to find government employees who were fraudulent with a conscience. So the 13th employee, a very valuable data point, was a young clerk who had a different sports car for every day of the week. A Monday sports car, a Tuesday sports car, a Wednesday sports car. So he was caught. Now you have to, the hurdle at which you get caught is kind of previous. Anyway, so we were able to work with that, but it wasn't nearly as easy or as productive as when you had massive amounts of examples of positive and negative. And it's amazing how often we'll work with clients and they don't, a colleague was talking about working with clients that were talking about dropping, who's gonna churn, who's gonna leave my telephone plan or whatever, and the client would give them a whole bunch of people who left, and just the examples of people who left, So we kind of have to educate our clients, say, hey, we need the positive and negative examples, and we need to know more about it. Well, and then I want to talk about how this, the only thing that matters is getting this. You can do great work and deliver a solution. In your minds, you're delivering a solution because you've got a model that works. It works out a sample. You've done all the science right. You deliver it. And probably the industry average is probably only half of those things actually get used. And so you think about, going to a very expensive restaurant and having a customized meal created for you and your guests, and you're paying for it, and then when they're not looking, you're scraping it into the trash. And that's what's happening half of the time when we create models. Now, in our first 10 years, that only happened a third of the time. We were horrified by that number. People were saying, wow, you're way above the average. But we were horrified that a third of the time our work was getting ignored. Well, we studied that. You can data mine that. So what's going on here? And we realized there's this important link. There's this carbon-based life form thing. Humans are involved. And, change management is a hard thing. Because basically, as a data scientist, you're going and saying, what is it you do again? Oh, how do you do it? Oh, we can do better. We have black boxes. Just wait a minute, And here you go. And now all you have to do is change the way you do everything. So for some reason that doesn't go over well. I don't know why. But so there's a better way. We have to work with them. I have to be part of the solution. we have to realize the hurdles to change are pretty phenomenal. And so a little bit on that, if time allows. Well, the hype around data science and AI is nothing new. Shortly after I started the company in '95, this Time magazine article came out in '96, March of '96. The prompt was Kasparov playing Deep Blue, IBM's chess playing machine, in chess. Now, Kasparov won this first match. He might be the greatest single human player who ever lived. Some people can make that argument. But Time magazine, you might not have known that from the Time magazine color. Can machines think? They already do, say scientists, that homogeneous band. So what, if anything, is special about the human mind? So they interviewed a lot of people in here. Now, being an engineer, most of the people they interviewed were computer scientists, so I don't know if that really counts as scientists. But anyway, so, sorry, just lobbed that grenade into the audience there. I mean, computer scientists who know the scientific method, awesome. They count as scientists. Okay, but anyway, the silliest thing I've ever seen in print was this quote by an MIT computer science professor. Of course machines can think. After all, humans are just machines made of meat. And I thought, how can anybody who's worked with computers and worked, oh, he's from MIT. He's never worked with humans. So just cut him some slack. Okay, so, all right, so, but in my view, human and computer strengths are much more complementary than alike. So, and we'll see some of that. All right, so the latest, though, the hype is really phenomenal right now. I mean, AI just beat Go, the world champion in Go. That wasn't supposed to happen for another 10 years, or, you know, according to the great AI singularity schedule, you know, which some of us have seen. Anyway, but, you know, that's a little early. And by the way, that computer program, which was trained on masters playing each other, has now been crushed by a computer program that's never seen humans play at all. So that's pretty interesting. Texas Hold'em poker, okay? You don't have complete information like you do with Go, complete information of a very complex game. You have bluffing and so forth like that. Now the best computers are playing at a high human level, meaning they're almost better than the best humans. So they're better than me by far, but you know, even the top champion humans are only barely better than the computers. So for all intents and purposes, they've conquered that domain. And then of course, in driving, subhuman, now not subhuman my kids, but subhuman the expert drivers, sorry kids if you're here. But anyway, and there in the 14-month period in California, there were 272 failures and 13 crashes that would have happened if there weren't a human sitting in the car. But just yesterday, I think, I read, okay, now they're allowing the cars to run around without humans in them. So obviously things have gotten better. So this has been, in the popular press, attributed to AI. But let me tell you a really exciting secret. It's not AI. AI is logic and mimicking humans and blah, 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 blah. And that is still in the trough of disillusionment, still worthy of scorn, in my humble opinion, as a data scientist who's been fighting AI all its life as an alternative source of wisdom and not one as good as inducing models from real data. Has its strengths, but it primarily has its weaknesses. You know what the secret is? You know what's fueling this success? It's data science. It's deep learning. It's just deeper neural nets. We've had neural nets for 30 years or more, and that's what's behind it. So, you know, this ancient technique, which now has better hardware to run on, is solving their problem, which means they have no idea why the car's turning left. That's the downfall. If you have a deep learning network that's taking in all the inputs and deciding what to do, this is extremely uninterpretable. Now we can argue about there's certain ways to interpret it, and I like the ways in image recognition, how you can see certain features, higher order features coming out at different places and so forth. But legally, you know, if a car decides to, in a terrible situation, you know, kill a person on the left and not the crowd on the right, you know, how are you going to explain the logic for what the decision was that happened and so forth? In any case, it's data science with its wonderful strengths of being able to figure out from data, induce from special cases what the general rule is, but not necessarily tell you what that rule is in a way that we can understand. So it is not AI. It's data science that's solving the problem. In fact, if you go back to the chess problem with Kasparov, Deep Blue used data science models to fine-tune the parameters and the trade-offs in the chess so they could better score all the intermediate positions in this big, huge tree of possibilities that they were looking at. And that beat Kasparov, and humans have never basically won since. Kasparov figured out some ways to beat it that he thought in a third round, challenged him to a third round. IBM said, no, dismantle the machine. Victory, marketing achieved, so forth. So, but nowadays your phone can beat a grandmaster. We had one of the brothers of one of our employees was a grandmaster, and he came in and had a wonderful tech talk. Every Friday we have a technical talk at Elder Research, and he came in and shared some of his learnings. It's fascinating. People who are really good at chess are very strange. I know that having been one at one time, but I was voted, I have to admit, studying humans is an interesting hobby of mine because I have been accused of not being one. But anyway, I was voted weirdest in my junior high, so I know I'm an outlier, I've been told. But the advantage there is that when you, and by the way, if there's a book my daughter gave me, my name is John Elder, so she gave me a John Elder Robeson, a book by John Elder Robeson. He is a fellow who suffers from Asperger's syndrome or autism spectrum. Anyway, he truly doesn't understand human emotions or facial recognition, things like that. So he's had to make a study of it. He's a very, very bright fellow. The book is fascinating. He's done some wonderful work. And so he's made a study of humans as if he were an alien almost on Earth. And then he tells his fellow Aspergians and so forth. So there's some very moving YouTube videos and so forth of him explaining to parents and the kids themselves that are suffering from this kind of spectrum of how to interact with other types of folks and how to use some of that information, and it's fascinating. But we could all use some of that. We could all use a little bit of actually studying and not taking it all intuitively. There's a brain system, a brain model that we'll talk about briefly here, which is popularized in the book by Daniel Kahneman called Thinking Fast and Slow. And the brain model that we have two systems: a very fast, intuitive system that we use 95% of the time, that just immediately sizes somebody up and it gets a feel for them and so forth. And it works astonishingly well much of the time. But then they have a very hard-to-use, effortful analytical system that we only use about 5% of the time that actually thinks rationally about things and does calculations and so forth. And of course, we in this room, that's what we're trying to train. But we are that part of a company's brain. That we are that part of an organization. We are the part of an organization. They're their only hope of thinking rationally, because the rest of it is all reacting with the personality, with this fast brain, and we're the slow brain. We're slow, but we're extremely valuable, and we'll show some of the flaws of the fast brain thinking in a minute. And it's astonishing it works as well as it does. It's a miracle, really, but it has huge flaws, and we need to learn how to train that slow part. So, all right, so neural nets have this nice, smooth, differentiable surface relating things, but we have all these other tools at our disposal, from nearest neighbors to decision trees, kernel density estimation, and Don was kind enough to mention the line triangle, or at least refer to it as a method I used in my dissertation, that it uses a piecewise planar approximation of the surface, but there's all these different ways of connecting the dots. But everything in data science depends on a smoothness assumption, that if you're close in your input space, you're likely to be close in your output space. So if we have a lot of similarities together, then we're going to have about the same answer in what movies like, or what products we buy, or how likely we are to defraud, or something like that. And so the important thing always comes down to get the inputs right. Measure closeness on the things that really matter. Don't pay attention to the things that don't. And that's what the fast brain is, paying attention to things that don't really matter, like, do they remind me of this person in terms of external characteristics? And the slow brain has to say, what are the features that really matter that I must focus on? Now, we have all these different algorithms, and a lot of arguments are around which one is best. So 20 years ago, we tried out 5 different algorithms on 6 different problems and did a bake-off. And this is one of many bake-offs that many folks have done. Now, here, lower is better. The lowest 0 would be that it won all the contests. Not that it got 0 error, but it beat all the other methods on this and subsequent slides. and higher is worse. And you can see that they're all over the place, that most techniques might be good on one or two problems and not so good on others. Now, can anyone who's close enough see, we're trying out neural nets, are the red ones, logistic regression, purple, linear vector quantization, the green, projection pursuit regression, the orange, and decision tree, the blue. Can anyone see what won most of the time on this bake-off here? Neural nets, the red ones. So it won about 4 out of 6 times. That's with expert use of neural nets. A naive user of the neural nets might not have had as good a, because neural nets use every input you give it. So you really have to be careful how you pare those inputs down and so forth. But so it's all over the place. It did poorly on one, did well on the others, and you would be very smart if you had chosen ahead of time neural nets. But you don't really know ahead of time. Neural nets are good, very competitive, but they're not always the winner. And of course, there are a lot of techniques out there. But instead of focusing on the characteristics of the problem and which technique is best, I'm going to give a hint about a very powerful, very simple idea, which is just combine those estimates in some rational way. So these are 4 different ways of ensembling those estimates, from averaging, which is the orange one, to voting, which is the greenish one, to a couple of more complex ones that I invented. These are just ways of taking those 5 estimates, maybe thinking of them as like a board of directors, and taking their consensus of their decisions and using that as your decision is much more accurate and much more stable. On this earlier one, you're looking at the things, the performance is all over the place, but people who like one technique or another can take comfort in the fact that every technique wins first or second place at least twice. So I was giving this talk in Santiago, Chile, and I said, every dog has its day. And it was being simultaneously translated into Spanish, which is really an impressive feat. And the woman said something completely different. And so I asked her later, what was that you said? She said, oh, I put it in a local idiom. I said, tell the pig Christmas is coming. So, you know, you're the pig. You think you're hot stuff. Christmas is coming. You're going to be dinner. I said, well, that's kind of the opposite of what I was saying, but it does convey the same point, you know. So anyway, yeah, so tell the pig Christmas is coming. But then if you instead put all the animals together, I don't know if this analogy, we should not, maybe stop with the analogy here, but anyway, you ensemble these things, you get something much more accurate in general. You're not guaranteed, except with trees. If you ensemble decision trees, so far in every single case I've seen, either academic or practitioner, an ensemble of decision trees has done better out of sample than a single decision tree. And this is very confusing because complexity is supposed to be the enemy of generalization. Simplicity is supposed to be more pure and more true. And how can many, many models together be generalized better than a single model? I tried to answer that in a paper that appears in one of my books, but also was in I gave to the Academy of Sciences. But it's, the answer appears to be that we're measuring complexity wrong. Complexity is not the number of parameters in our model, but it's the flexibility of the model. So when you look at the flexibility of the model to random changes in the output, the ensemble is less flexible than an individual model, and therefore it is more simple by that measure. And you can quantify that measure and show that the Occam's razor principle still holds, that ensembles are less complex statistically than any one of their components, usually. Really counterintuitive. Well, on to the examples. The first, and I'm going to go in chronological order. So this is over 20 years ago. We started a hedge fund. You're not supposed to be able to do that, well, and make money, but it lasted for about 10 years. We found a pocket of inefficiency. Thanks to luck and hard work, there was a piece of the market that wasn't acting efficiently and persisted in not acting efficiently. Typically, those things don't last very long. But we were able to use data science to figure out from past patterns how to predict a day ahead what was likely to happen the next day. And we were right, early on we were right about 3 out of 5 times, which is a phenomenal batting average. Later on it was more like 55%, 54%, 53%. And so the edge started to slip away. But early on here, the thing we're trading in this example is yellow, and the results of trading it are green. So at the end of the first year of actual trading, the client here, local client here in Charlottesville, put $2 million in. We lost him $4,000 on day one, so we didn't talk to him that day. So phone? I don't hear a phone. No, you hear a phone? No, anyway, but after that, it did well. And in that day, the insurance rates were pretty high, around 6%. But if you, the model after the thing we were trading lost 11% in the first year, and the thing we were trading made 27% with half the risk, half the standard deviation, roughly speaking. So a much better Sharpe ratio. So it looked really good. However, the client wasn't actually excited about putting more money in and making a big deal out of it, and other models were being built as well, because it was a rough ride. That green thing, which we could go long, we could bet with the yellow thing going up, but if the yellow thing went down, the best thing we could do was go flat and not be in at all. So when it's having that crash sort of in the middle third of the year, the best we could do is step aside. So we were losing a little money, but losing a lot less than it was losing, so that's where the model was really adding its value. But nevertheless, it was a rough ride to experience, and the client wasn't really sure they wanted to go forward. And I used t-tests to show, oh, it's a very significant model. I'm not sure, anybody here ever convinced anyone of anything with a t-test? So yeah, it doesn't work really well, because people don't like statistics. I don't know if anybody has ever noticed that. Studies have shown it's the least well caught. I didn't say taught, I said caught. The least well caught material in the universities, all material, even including French literature. It's the least well that changes the brain the least of anything. And you think about it, it kind of makes sense. You know, that statistics is kind of like a combination of calculus and Buddhism. You know, the reality you see is but one possible reality. Oh, and solve this integral. It's just not, it just doesn't go together well. So anyway, but the key question in statistics is, how likely could I have gotten this result by chance, or a result even more interesting than this? And so this crisis of not being able to convince the client of something that we'd worked on so hard and had done so well, not being able to convince him that it was really good and that it really worked and it was really significant, led to an invention, and that was what I later called target shuffling, the idea of using simulation to show significance. So in this case, the timing was important. Now, in a year, there's about 250 trading days. We were in the market about 40% of the time. So there's 100 buys, let's say, 150 outs. And the information was in the timing of those buys. Buy on Tuesday, buy on Thursday, buy on Monday. Every day we'd have to say whether we were going to buy on the next day or not. So I took that 250-bit vector of zeros and ones and shuffled it and saw how that would have done, and did that 1,000 times. And out of those 1,000 times, only 15 times did the randomized timing do better than the actual timing. So what we have is a 1.5% chance that we could have gotten results this good or better by chance. Well, that made perfect sense to the client. And so he put $20 million in. So the t-test was answering the same question, but it just doesn't, you have to have so much faith in the math to answer that question. Whereas when you do it with a simulation, it's very understandable, very explainable. And it can solve much harder problems than this, where the t-test, the assumptions of a t-test, if you log the returns, actually work out very nicely here. But there are a lot of situations where they weren't. In fact, if you look in the literature 80 years ago, and the geniuses that were inventing statistics, they actually talked about permutations as the way they would love to do it if they only could. And now we have computers. It's easy for us to do it. But they used calculus as a shortcut since they didn't have computers. So why are we still teaching it that way? I just throw that out there. You know, if you take two groups and you teach one using resampling techniques like this, and another using the mathematical-based techniques, which must be a hazing, it's a hazing phenomenon, really. And the resampling group does much better on solving problems. So I challenge everyone to do that. Now, I have a 2-minute video. We have papers on this. We have R packages. We have all sorts of things. But the thing I'm proudest of is a 2-minute animated video to explain target shuffling. So let's see if you'll indulge me. It explains it twice. So we'll play at least we'll play at least 1 minute of it and see if that helps with the understanding. Let's see. Now I have to get the play here somehow.
Using algorithms to find previously unknown patterns and trends can help you forecast future behavior. But extracting real meaning from data without being fooled by coincidences can be challenging. and misinterpreting results leads to inaccurate conclusions and wrong business decisions. Target shuffling is a process that reveals the statistical accuracy of data mining results. How does it work? First, build a model to predict the target variable and note your model's strength. Second, randomly shuffle the target vector to break the relationship between each output and its vector of inputs. Third, search for a new best model or best apparent discovery, BAD, and save its strength. Then, repeat steps 2 and 3 many times and record a distribution of the strengths of the BADs. Finally, note where your findings' strength lies on this BAD distribution. That is its significance. For instance, if 15% of the BADs are better, then there's a 15% chance that your original finding is bogus. Here's an example. Before a math quiz, have your students answer specific questions on some harmless personal information. These will be the input features of a model. After the students take the quiz, model each student's score as a function of his or her personal information to identify patterns. Note the strength of the model. Say the R-squared of the regression. To test the validity of the hypothesis, randomly shuffle the outputs and give each student someone else's quiz score. Then, redo the modeling and discovery steps and save the strength of the resulting best apparent discovery. Repeat this reshuffling and remodeling over and over, recording the strength of each bogus finding in a histogram. Mark on the histogram's distribution where your initial result falls. This is its true significance, or probability, that a result this good could have been found by chance. If you're a business person, you want to make decisions based upon accurate results, and communicate those results in a way that's easy for your stakeholders to understand. To find out more about target shuffling, contact Elder Research today.
So this, I'm going around and talking a lot about that technique because the need is great, and there's a wonderful group in town, the Center for Open Science, that is helping to address the issue of replicability in scientific results, and half of the problems can be solved with the things that they're doing, and the other half can be solved by better data analytics like this. And so this makes it even harder to publish, is the downside, which is going to make it harder to be adopted, but it gives you a much better idea of the true probability that your result's going to hold up out of sample. So that's extremely valuable. So currently, journals are accepting papers and they have t-tests where, roughly speaking, there's supposed to be a 19 out of 20 chance that the thing is real, that they're accepting. When really, even the journals themselves, like the Lancet in England, a prestigious medical journal, they believe that 50% of the papers that they publish are bogus. They just don't know which 50%. Others, external people, believe 65 to 95% of the papers they publish are bogus. So, but they're optimistic is still that 50% is bogus. So there's a lot of money being wasted on finding these false discoveries that aren't replicable, and the better data analytic techniques are going to save lives. They're going to save a huge amount of money. They're going to save a lot of trouble and time, and what we do is valuable and important, and need to do it right. Well, on to the second application. The second application was credit scoring. We did work for Capital One. Now, Capital One does nothing but credit scoring, and they are phenomenally good at it, and they have, at the time, they had 100 full-time PhD and MS and master's statisticians working day in day on credit scoring and all various stripes, and they were not happy about being directed by somebody high up to use a small data science firm in Charlottesville. It was like a cover your tail kind of an operation. And where there's a difference of opinion, there's a betting opportunity. So we said, I can see that you don't think we're going to help. How about if we charge you only half if we do worse and double if we do well? And they're like, great, half price deal. So the sign on the dotted line. Well, the bottom line is we did better. Now, were they excited about that? Actually they were, because a reduction in the rate from, just to make up a number, 9% default to 8.9% default, that's tens of millions of dollars to Capital One. That's their core business. And so if we can do anything to improve the accuracy just a little bit, it has huge bottom line impact, huge leverageability. It's true with insurance, investments, credit scoring, all these things and it matters a lot. Another great way to get gains is to get a new source of data, a new source of links or Google data or text data or something like that. But leverageability is a key way. Here, we used ensembles was one of the keys. And if you used ensembles of trees, it made trees competitive with the other methods. Trees alone are way up out there. Here, lower is better. MARS, multivariate adaptive regression splines, won, neural nets, and polynomial nets were second. Stepwise regression was in there. And then when you started to add them up in pairs and look at ensembles of pairs, you get a distribution, and 3 at a time, 4 and 5 at a time. Overall, when you put them all together, the trend, the median of the returns of the goes down as you add more models in combination. And you never really get an overfit situation. We went out about a dozen models, different types of models, and you get a point of diminishing returns, obviously, but you never get overfit by putting multiple competing models together, because they're not overfit in the sense that they're all built independently. They're not adding complexity to each other. So there are some outliers. There were a set of 3 models. You can see that outlier up there that did worse than all individual models, but there was a set of 3 models that did better by far than the others. And it's still a hard problem to predict ahead of time which subset of models will do best combining. So as a rule, make ones that are individually accurate, that have something to offer that's contribute in terms of differences of opinion. And when those happen together, I like the analogy of a board of directors. If you have experts from different areas and they're working together, they tend to go to a compromise decision that's less risky than the overall. So ensembles were the key there to make. You shouldn't be able to make a contribution to a group that's spent hundreds of times more effort already than you have on a problem, right? So it's nice to have the technology, to have a secret weapon in your pocket to help with being able to do that and be able to make a contribution. Another area that's really hard, really difficult, is drug discovery. And one reason it is because the placebo is such a worthy and wily foe. You have to believe it to see it, right? So the placebo, if it was tested against nothing, the placebo would be approved for everything. There was a fake ad on NPR many years ago for placebos about how it was good for liver cancer and hair restoration and all sorts of things. So, and basically it is. If you compare giving somebody a placebo, which is maybe a sugar pill, has no active compound in it, versus doing nothing, they show some kind of marked improvement as a group versus nothing. So to beat a placebo with an active compound is actually quite difficult. In fact, Wall Street Journal a year ago or so had an article saying that placebos are harder to beat than ever. They're better than ever. 10 years ago, drugs that passed wouldn't pass with today's placebos. What is going on? What have they done? Well, and they didn't know, actually, in that article, but I know. They have side effects in them. You see, in the modern times, now no self-respecting pharmaceutical company would intentionally put side effects in their placebo to make their job even harder. But if a side effect's in the placebo, and you get nauseated or your pee turns blue or something, you're like, oh, I must have the real thing. And so the placebo effect kicks in because you're in a drug trial. And the reason they've had to start doing that is social media. People know they're in a drug trial, and they hear about other people and figure out they're in the drug trial and they're having these certain side effects and so forth. And they realize you're the control, and they get discouraged and they drop out. And so the whole trial ends up being useless. So they've had to make their job harder just to have the trials complete. I'm figuring this out. I'm intuiting this from the outside. I don't know this from inside data. In any case, the placebo was hard enough to had it beforehand, and now it's even harder. So so this is astonishing when a new drug is introduced and approved. It's also really scary, and you realize, are you kidding me that blockbuster drugs are only this much better than a placebo? Yes, that's the truth. So sorry to bring that to you. Anytime you start working with medical data, it's really horrifying. You don't want to just don't get sick, and don't die, for God's sake, don't die. Anyway, but like after the Challenger disaster, there was a bunch of folks that were brought together to talk about risk, and I was one of them for some reason. But one of the other fellows was an expert on risk of all sorts, and he showed that just walking into a hospital, certainly not the wonderful one down the street here, but walking into a hospital was as risky as bungee jumping. How many people here have been bungee jumping? How many people here have been bungee jumping more than once? Okay, you're a really brave person. So I did it one time. I took my son when we were visiting my cousin, and we went bungee jumping, and they put it like a towel around your feet. Okay, then they tie this cord. They weigh you down at the bottom, and they write the weight in magic marker. They said that's the most terrifying step for a lot of the ladies, is they write your weight on the magic marker on your hand, but they don't want you lying about your weight because it kind of matters, you know. Anyway, I get up there, and they're like, bring out Big Bertha. You know, so they get this cable they don't normally use, you know, that tied it around me, you know, and then, you know, you're standing on this thing. It's like 425 feet to this little creek down there. Now, do you want to touch the water? I said, sure. Well, as I'm getting momentary insanity, I do leap off of the thing, and I'm getting closer and closer to the water. I'm not really slowing down. You know, there's supposed to be sort of this tension and this elasticity. They've miscalculated. So I hit the water, and I go through the water, and then this is a very unique experience, only happened once, pulled backwards up through the water, talking about clearing your sinuses. Anyway, through the water, and then, you know, I'm doing this stuff. They have a raft, you come out, and they quickly wind it down, and don't have this nice bouncing experience, you know. They're kind of like, oh my gosh, what have we done? By the way, never bungee jump over a parking lot. So anyway, and somebody from the shore says, did you pay extra for that? And I said, no, I didn't. So anyway, so just walking into a hospital is supposed to be as dangerous as that because of what you could pick up. And I was like, okay, I'm going to stay away. But anyway, so they've got this drug. Pharmacy and Upjohn have recently merged. This is a while back. And they've got this compound they've worked on. They've spent $300 to $400 million already exploring all these possible compounds. This is in the early days of automated drug discovery. There's really high expectations for being able to churn out all these experiments and test the activity of these different compounds. And they've got this one that looked promising, and they did some drug trials with it, some controlled trials with placebos in lots of different countries, US, other countries, and this is back a little bit before people started talking back to their doctors, especially in Europe. Somebody wearing a coat and giving you something, it was, oh, this is going to work. So anyway, the placebo effect was very strong, and they were not showing enough significance. They had 3 different tests. It was for a mental type of thing, so there were a lot of kind of questions. So, how are you feeling now? You know, that they had to ask, and there were 3 different diagnostic tests that were possible to use. So that's already cheating, because how would you like to take 3 different history tests and take the best grade, you know, and have that be the one that you show your guidance counselor or whoever's requiring that grade? Yeah. So the FDA, whichever one had done the best, they were going to, you know, go forward with to the next step. So it's already cheating a little bit, the multiple comparison, but none of them were doing well enough on their own, and they were trying to decide. They had a short amount of time to decide whether to go forward or not. To go forward would cost another $1 billion. So they were about to drop it, is really what was going to happen, unless we could maybe see something they hadn't seen. Sort of a last-ditch, very low-cost, unfortunately, effort to see if there was something more they could see. Now, the trick we use is we use this thing called kernel density estimation. So what's shown here is a prettier version than what I'll show you in a second, but imagine a Gaussian data distribution in 3 dimensions, and then you have samples of it. So if this were perfect, that would be spheres within spheres. It would be perfect. But what this is doing is trying to induce the distribution of the data from the samples, and so because it's a small sample, it doesn't look like a nice, pretty sphere. But you can see that there are layers, and what happens there is you show quantiles, like maybe, in this case, maybe half the data is inside that red shape, and 3/4 of the data is inside the other shape, and something like that. But the versions we didn't have as fancy a computer as the more recent ones. We had to show things with slices to look through them. So here we have a 3-dimensional distribution of the data, and the density plots showing the red shape contains 3/4 of the data, the interior green shape contains half the data, and then 1/4 of the data in the last blue shape there. So what this is the placebo. So goodness is the upper right back corner there, and badness and death is over here in the lower left back corner. Everyone starts out in the middle. That's one key thing, was to normalize everybody's responses to be the change in how they felt, not on an absolute scale. Since everybody's self-rating how they're feeling in multiple different dimensions and getting it one score by the tests. And the tests are the 3 axes. The 3 tests are the 3 axes. So we're using all the data. And you can see by that distribution that the 3 tests are quite correlated because the data occupies that diagonal there. But they are also introducing new information. So it's a chubby distribution. So 3/4 of the data is fitting within that shape. But you can see that some folks who have gotten better with the placebo. You see that little solid block of stuff in the upper right. But that a larger chunk has sort of faded off into getting a little bit worse. So it's fairly balanced for the placebo. Now, the FDA is not going to pay any attention to this chart, but this is not an FDA decision at this point. This is an interior to the company decision of whether to make a big investment or not. Now, that's the placebo, and now that we've done the hard work of understanding that visual, here's the drug. So nobody has gotten worse. The 3/4 of the data that's shown by the distribution show a marked improvement for many and a small improvement for a few. So with this pair of images, they made the billion-dollar decision to go forward with the drug. Did many years of further trials and testing before the FDA. And 10 years after we did this work, I ran into somebody at a conference who told me the good news, that it had worked, and it had been one of the 3 drugs that they had introduced in that decade. So even a small project from outsiders, and when they hired us, they said, well, we can teach you what you need to know about pharmacology quicker than you can teach us what we need to know about data science, so, or data mining. So that's either an insult to my teaching ability or a nice compliment to our utility as data miners, data scientists, modelers, that we can come in there and with the right amount of questions and interaction and cooperation with the client, we can get to the heart of the matter. And in this case, look at it from the outside without the blinders on of the normal ways of doing things and bring in technology from a different field. This is density estimation types of things are used for things like seeing what the earthquake, the intensity of earthquake distribution is and things like that. So it had never before been used in a pharmacological sense, so that I know of. All right, let me go to the 4th example. I'll be real brief on this one. The Social Security Administration was looking to do approval for disability payments. We taxpayers support folks that are very poor and very ill through the Social Security Administration, and they have to be approved for disability. Only about 1/3 of the folks who apply are approved. It's a long and bureaucratic process that can sometimes take up to 2 years. Sometimes people die while their application is still in process. You'll be glad to know it doesn't stop the application. So their heirs get a little something if they turn out to have been needful. It turns out that a lot of there's 5 layers of appeal, so it's worse than the Supreme Court. There are more layers, and 1/3 of the cases are eventually approved, but not that many initially are approved. Maybe about 1/4 are initially approved. But of those that are appealed, half overturn the original decision. So at first you say, well, that's really bad if half of the original decisions must not be very consistent if half of them are overturned. And that is part of the problem, because these are made by adjudicators in every state all over the nation. And some of them are not very good at it. One of them, we noticed, did the opposite of whatever their supervisor recommended, no matter the merits of the case. So, things like that. So there's things going on there. By the way, when you get a computer involved, it's extraordinarily useful to go back and compare. You use the human, I call it the golden answer. It's the best answer you have. It's not the truth. It's not like a physics experiment where you throw a rock and you measure where it lands. You're saying the doctor has said, this is cancer, or this isn't cancer, or this is a good case, or this isn't. By the way, when a radiologist looks at your chart and decides if it's cancer or not, then they look at that same chart later in the same day, there's a 20% chance they'll have a different diagnosis. So you get a really cheap second opinion if you want it. So, but anyway, but that's kind of scary, that's the best we can do as humans. We take these highly trained experts and we have them look very carefully, and they're wrong with their own, minimum 20% of the time, and probably more than that. And so the models are extraordinarily useful because you have to have those expert answers to get started. But once you build the models, now you have this, consistent, logical thing that you can compare against all these original ones, and you can look for the outliers. and you can go back and re-examine those cases. And when the few times we've been able to do that, one was for a defense project where we were trying to rate the danger of different people that had been encountered on the field. And the client was like, well, it's getting all these cases wrong, and we'll prove it. And they went back and re-examined those cases, and they came back a believer. They said 75% of the 200 cases that we examined where our experts and your model disagreed, we now believe your model. And so that was a real huge turning point in there. So anytime you can build a model, then use that model to look back at your original cases and see what you can re-examine. Of course, that might scare powers that be even more. But in any case, this was a hard problem to get right because of the inconsistencies across there. But you're using that as your best estimate for what is truth, what you train your model on. And we're using this. So it turned out, long story short, that text information was the best way to do this. And the goal, as set out by the president, actually was to, there's huge lines for this. It's taking too long. What about the easy cases? Can we have the computer just pick those out and highlight them and have them reviewed very quickly? And the answer was yes. So we could eventually, just by looking at the text on what they call it the allegation field, which tells you the attitude they had toward the client, say, what you allege is wrong with you. They have video of people who are hobbling in with a cane, filling out these applications, and then later that day putting, roofing on a new roof, doing all sorts of amazing physical activity. So there is some definite fraud involved, but for most people it's not fraud. But the allegation field, what you allege is wrong with you, has all these high-value keywords of text in there. And so we were associating the text with the outcome and building up some great technology for how to do that. That was very robust. And the result was 20% of the approvals could be made immediately and freeing up the queue for others. And so that was implemented, unfortunately by another company, but that was implemented and is rolled out. Same with the anti-tax fraud work has been rolled out and been very effective. Last example, oil and gas exploration, more recent. In this case, natural gas, post-fracking, there's a lot of natural gas, but the gas, especially in really colder climes, they sometimes freeze up. So it freeze up on the surface, the gas lines do, or even underground, they get clogged, and that's especially problematic. You need to take, these crews go out there with these huge plungers, these huge steel plungers to break up the particulates that have seized and clogged the pipes, or they pour methane down there to dissolve the stuff, and that has to be then remediated and taken out so that the environment isn't harmed by it and so forth. They only have enough crews to visit about 1/5 of the sites in a year, and they need to know which 5th would work. So we built a model to predict 4 to 6 months in advance which gas wells would freeze up. And we're very successful at doing that. You can see here that this is what's called a lift chart or cumulative response chart. The millions of cubic feet deferred, so basically the dollars or the gas saved is the red line. The blue thin line there is how far we can go, so we want to maximize that. The 50-degree angle line or the 45-degree angle line is what would happen, the expected return randomly. Now, we're only right 57% of the time when we say a gas well 4 to 6 months from now. By the way, we could be much more correct if we only needed a 1 or 2 months advance notice. I don't know why they need 4 to 6 months advance notice to schedule these. I think it was maybe a try to make them fail situation, but I don't know. But we met that challenge. But we're only right 57% of the time. So one of the fellows, and this is Houston, Texas, says, "Well, using elder research is like flipping a coin." And I said, well, that straight line there, I didn't say this because I wasn't in the room, but what I would have said is that straight line there is how you're doing now. What you're doing is like rolling the dice. Do you want to have to get a 6 or do you want to have to get a head? So which would be better? We're doing more than 3 times better than what they're doing. But unfortunately, that phrase set the wrong baseline in their head. That it was only a little bit better than chance because it was only 57% and chance was 50%. Well, chance isn't 50%, it's 17%. But that set that wrong baseline in their heads. So this lift chart was so far above what was expected, but for some reason it wasn't making sense to them until we added those 95-degree confidence lines. which we did through simulation. So with those little faint red lines that go around the lift chart is if you ran many, many simulations, 95% of the time, the resulting deferrals would be within those bounds. And they started calling this the banana chart, because the little red lines made it look like a banana. Anyway, who knows? Engineers from Houston. But so they believed the banana chart. So in their minds, there was this chance that we could be getting this result. They just didn't know it was that remote. When they saw the 95% confidence intervals, engineers understood that and saw how far it was beyond that. It suddenly made sense. So you never know what'll connect sometimes with the client, and you have to try lots of different ways sometimes. So when we solve a really hard problem like this, and by the way, this problem we found out later they had spent $20 million even getting this thing set up, and they'd had 4 other companies fail at this. So, you know, I wish we'd known that when we priced it, but we didn't. But anyway, but when you solve something like this, this is how you feel, right? Well, I've learned that our clients see us more like this. Hey guys, I found some data over here, you know. So anyway, but that's kind of the reality of it, you know. There's a lot of not so noble work in data science, and it really was the secret to this work was a lot of hard work with really, really messy data. But let me kind of conclude in my last 10 minutes or so, 10 or 15 minutes, that analytics is only a success if it's used. Of all those projects, the one that hasn't yet seen implementation is that oil and gas one. So the oil and gas one, for less than $1 million, they could save $100 million. I mean, it's as sure as anything. You know, there's a 99% chance, let's say, that they could save $100 million by spending less than $1 million, and they're not doing it. Why? Why do companies make these seemingly unfathomable decisions or lacks of decisions when faced with the value that they've already paid for and it's proven to all their specifications? They can see the need, that we're not calling for any additional, this is just rerouting their existing staff. Don't tell them, but it costs a lot less than $1 million, but don't tell them. Anyway, so why would they not implement it? Well, there's a lot of issues. Of course, you have to get the technology right, and that takes good technology and clear thinking about the problem. And by the way, this is the main thing that separates, a lot of people think, oh, I could be a good data scientist. I've worked on all these contests. A lot of people have done some really good work on lots of different contests, and they think, you know, you don't need domain expertise because look how many contests I've done really well on. Well, the contest itself has used a lot of domain expertise to set up the problem. In the real world, that's a big part of the issue is what is the real problem? What are the pain points? How do we get at it? Where are the data? What's the criteria of merit? You know, all these kinds of things that are already pre-set up in a contest are part of the engagement, and that requires a lot of domain knowledge. So you need that clear thinking about the problem and about the domain. But the softer issues are trust and the willingness of the client or the group to change what they're doing based on the insight in short order. And so early data miners, here's a depiction of a very early data scientist, Zog. So you can see he's introduced a very novel way of reducing a pain point of cooking meat. You know, it's reducing the pain very nicely. But the question is, what's going to happen next? You know, by the way, it's kind of interesting that glasses predated sticks in technology. But, you know, what is the next step? If we think the painless introduction of sticks is the next step, then we're a little naive. They might just go beat up Zog. You know, notice that Zog eats alone. So maybe Zog doesn't have the Neanderthal people skills to get his technology adopted. So anyway, the technology is going to be really helpful, but we need to understand one another to do it well. So this, I highly recommend this book by Daniel Kahneman. Now there's a book about Daniel Kahneman that's actually by Michael Lewis, which is actually a good read too. He visited UVA many years ago, a very nice, pleasant gentleman. Won the Nobel Prize in economics, even though he's a psychologist, but he's done a lot of work on how we're not rational creatures and how that affects economic decisions, and therefore it was well deserved. Let me just show some examples from the world of that kind of research. One is a study of parole judges in Israel. This is an example of our cognitive biases, how humans don't think rationally or consistently about things, and how much they need us, really. So here are very highly trained expert judges who are reviewing the cases. I think they're cases for military detainees. And they take about 6 minutes to review a case and to recommend parole or not, as these folks come up for parole. About a third of the folks are approved overall, but when they looked at it over the day, so imagine the 8 judges are synchronized so that every 6 minutes they render a decision and so forth, and then they plot the average approval rates of the decisions of the judges over the course of the day. Look at that. They start out at 2/3, and then there's this incredibly fast drop to nothingness, and then a very exhilarating reset. What happened there? Lunch. The care and feeding of judges is very important. So and then those are probably bathroom breaks or snacks or whatever. So yes, having food at a conference is extremely important. I recommend everyone have some, especially while listening to me. Refresh your glucose. Yeah, the cognitive depletion of thinking hard just wears you out, and you never want to go before a judge at the end of the day. And so the question is, and of course the judges would be the first ones to deny this or to be astonished by this, because they're giving it their best effort to be as fair and impartial as possible. But obviously this is a much bigger effect than the merits of the case. There's no there's no sorting of the cases by easy to hard and reset at lunch. No, this is all related. It's very, very scary. Another one picking on judges, this is an anchoring effect, and looking at shoplifters in Germany. And there's a judge, although it's sort of detailed-oriented, people will notice it's not a German judge. But anyway, that's the way I remember Germany from when I lived there in kindergarten. May have had something to do with my behavior in kindergarten, but anyway, before these judges are rendering a verdict, which is on the order of months, they have to look at a roll of the dice. And the dice are weighted to either be a 3 or a 9. And when the judge sees the roll of the dice and then makes the verdict, the folks who see a 3 have an average of a 5-month verdict. The folks who see a 9 have an average of an 8-month verdict. So if you measure the effect size, the dice is accounting for 50% of the size of the verdict, much larger than any other characteristic alone. So this is really, really scary. So anchoring, just having a number out there, even if it's not related, especially if it is related, like somebody's looking at a house and somebody says, I think that's worth $330,000. You can't get that number out of your head. You start from there, and I think it's a survival mechanism because we don't want to be so weird. We don't want to be voted off the island, so we instinctively work from what somebody else has given us. And that's a negative because people can use that against us. They can throw a number out there and anchor us and affect what we're doing, and we're not thinking about the problem rationally. We're not thinking about it from the ground up anymore, even when it's completely unrelated. There was a person teaching a data science course over the course of a day, and they had a little micro projector, and they said, we'll give this projector to whoever can guess the price, back when they were sort of brand new. So instead of putting your names on a postcard, put your last 3 digits of your Social Security number, and then guess the price, and then put them in here, and after lunch, we'll give it away. So they did. There was a winner. Everything was exciting. After they typed the data in, though, there was like a 70% correlation between the 3 numbers of the Social Security number and the price. The people had anchored on their own number that they had put down, even though it had nothing to do with it. So it's really scary how irrational we can be and how much we need data science. One more effect before we move on, the halo effect. Some of you younger people may not recognize this. This is New York City. So think of it as an isolation chamber with a tethered cell phone. So folks walk into there, they can have a semi-private conversation, and then they step out. As they step out, a researcher, poor schmuck, spills his papers. Now, this being New York City, what proportion of folks stepping out of that telephone booth help this guy out in any way at all? 0. Very good guess. Very good guess. It turns out it's 4%, and a New Yorker friend of mine, they do exist, said, those weren't locals. Yeah. So, but now they make one small change to the experiment, and it was a while ago. They left, and 88% helped. And it didn't have anything to do with changing who spilled the papers or what time of day or anything like that. The change was they left a dime which some of you youngsters, that's a cylindrical metallic device that passes for coin. Anyway, passes for money. They left the dime on the shelf there, and that was what it used to cost for a local call. So the person had the positive surprise of a free local call. They make the call, a minute or two later, they open the door. Now they're 20 times more likely to help that guy out. 20 times more likely. So when you go to a conference and get a squeeze toy and then buy a $5,000 piece of software, you've been halo affected. No, it's built into us. And again, probably for survival, probably so that we get along, probably so we have these relationships and we pass it along, we pass it forward. But wow, how irrational is that? And how we would hate to have that used against us, and how unconscious that is. None of the people doing that were aware that was happening to them. All right, to finish up, data science is really powerful and proven. There's no hype necessary. What it can do is amazing. We don't need to be making cognitive computing claims that are completely unfounded. In fact, big company with 3 initials. So anyway, companies in vastly different fields are producing huge gains by extracting useful information from their data. So they're seeing it not as sludge that has to be dealt with and processed, but now as a fertile source of value. Human creativity, intuition, we're still the only ones that can create something new. You know, data science, you have to have examples of it to be able to predict it. So we're really bad with when things change. You know, data science is really good for continuity and so forth. Creating something new and different, it takes creative intuition and so forth. But we are very flawed, and people who are relying on their gut instinct, people who want to interpret models and say, I'll see it when I know it. Stein walked into the room here when he and I shared a room here at UVA in grad school, and he had a project over at the University of Virginia. I was over there back in the day, many years ago, when we would present things on view graphs. You remember those things, clear things? So Stein was over there presenting to a doctor and showing one variable versus another and putting them out there, and the doctor was taking notes and the head nurse was taking notes, and then Stein, being the good scientist he was, realized, oh my gosh, I've put them upside down. So what was a positive correlation, right, now will be a negative correlation. The doctor said, oh, that makes sense too, and started making notes. So, our intuition, our ability to tell stories is so great that we can make sense of anything, even when it's not true. Even when it's the opposite of what we just saw, we can make a story to make that sense too. So our ability to protect ourselves with interpretability is almost non-existent. We need really good science to do it. Our brains are too easily fooled. And our colleagues who think they know what they're doing with their intuition, we have to learn from them. We have to absorb their information, but we also have to respectfully show them when the data shows them something different from what everyone knows, because that's a real value that we can add. But if they don't believe it and they don't trust us, they're not going to accept it, and it's not going to do anyone any good. So we really have to pay attention to the change issues, the people values, the carbon-based life forms that we work with are valuable and important, and they have to learn how to trust us. So we need to do good work, and we need to be able to learn how to, or at least have one person on the team who speaks human, learn how to communicate that good work and win some ways. So good luck. Thank you all. Absolutely. Some mics, they have some mics running around.
Thanks. So Carl Jung, one of the psychoanalysts of the sort of previous century, would look at your placebo data and say, well, doesn't this, I'm doing this interpretation you just said was dangerous, okay. The placebo effect shows how much of our sickness is due to psychology or psychological effects. Have you thought about doing any kind of research on that kind of a question instead of on drugs themselves?
Wow, that's a huge one. The fact that the placebo effect is as strong as it is very, very disturbing and very encouraging at the same time. And so there's got to be some truth to it. In fact, one thing they've discovered is that when it was first discovered, I believe, in one of the early wars of last century, when they ran out of morphine and they injected salt, warm water, which wouldn't be harmful, but it had a pretty strong effect in reducing the pain. And most of us think that's all in the brain, but they've since done more experiments where they've studied that physiological changes in the body are actually occurring. In other words, when someone has a placebo like that applied to them, there are measurable changes in their chemistry in their body. It's not, that may be caused by the brain, but it's measurable in ways that we didn't imagine before. So yeah, something's going on there, which is really powerful. So thank goodness for the placebo effect. You know, the pharmacy and Upjohn folks said that 3/4 of their drug's effect was the placebo effect. And this was a long time ago when the placebos weren't even as good. So it's a little scary.
Maybe to add to that complexity, if I remember that NPR story, the placebo is even more powerful than you think, because Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, I believe, the patients actually want an open-label placebo prescribed to them, and they swear that it works. I don't know if you remember that part of the story or not. So this is even more complex than...
Yes, if doctors tell the patients that you are being given a placebo, which has no active ingredient, it still has an effect.
Exactly right.
Which is amazing.
Exactly. The second is a question on your trend shuffling method. I'm new to data science, so my ignorance may be displayed here. So you have an effect that you had a red bar, and then you have outcomes from other experiments or other cases, and you're shuffling that. So I'm trying to bring it to a model, connect to some model-based world where you are creating random noise around the signal and hope that the signal does not get drowned in the noise that you generate, to ascertain that the single data trend that you see is the right one without creating a model. Is that philosophically the idea?
You've picked up on something which is very good that you have. I really showed two types. The one for the financial model was where the model had already been built and there was a track record it had. So I used a simple what if alternative scenario histogram. That's what you might call light data target shuffling. And in that situation, it said, here was reality. Had we used different timings, what other realities would have ensued? And where do we fall on that distribution? Wow, it's at the 1.5% level. This was really very informative. We were either lucky, had to be so lucky that we fell into the 1.5%, or there's real skill involved here. It's really, everything's all down to, we were this lucky, so it's worth trying again. The other more complex or deeper target shuffling is where you redo the training. You haven't yet you're still looking to implement the model, but you've trained something that you think is good, so now you mess with the data and retrain models and find out what else you could have found. And that was what was talked about in the video, and that's done a lot with medical data and so forth, where you're looking for a hot spot for a disease or something in your data set. Well, hotspots occur randomly anyway, so if you relabel which cases are diseased or not and look for the new hotspot, how interesting is it? How much of the time when the null hypothesis holds, when there is no relationship between the inputs and the outputs because you've messed with the outputs, how much of the time do you find something apparently more interesting? That's the harder version of target shuffling. So yeah, there are really two versions, and it's good that you've caught on that. Thank you.
So one of the problems that I've encountered when trying to model stuff and do predictive stuff is there's typically bias in the data. So whether that's relative size or frequency or recency. So what are some of the techniques that you found to be effective for removing that kind of bias?
That's an extraordinarily important thing. You know, there's the data science, this wonderful, fast, very obedient, but dim-witted assistant we have here knows nothing about the world. All it knows about the world is in that data. So it doesn't know that life is good, doesn't know that things fall when you drop them, it doesn't know that more dollars are better than fewer dollars up to a point. It doesn't know these things. So if it's not in the data, It doesn't know it. But if something is in the data a lot, it thinks it's really important. So anytime you have, so you have to be very careful how you curate the world to your machine. And that's in the data, and that's through the data. So what you show the machine about the world is your data. And so you have to be very careful about what you emphasize about the world and what you leave out about the world. And this is where you really need the domain expertise and the knowledge about things to craft a good picture of the world for your assistant to work with. So, and there's various techniques to do that, but the really important thing is just to recognize it knows nothing about the world except what's in the data, so what you show it is really important, and you got to think about that carefully. Which means you may want to throw out perfectly good cases, but they're cases that distract it from the purpose for which you're training it. So, besides obviously throwing out cases that are, for instance, in that Social Security data set, originally, so one class of people who receive assistance are people with premature babies, born prematurely. Now, for a baby born prematurely, would it be that people would need assistance? In other words, they have a health problem if the baby is of low birth weight or high birth weight? You would think low birth weight would be the ones that would need the help. But if you looked at weight alone, it was correlated with high birth weight. Assistance was correlated with high birth weight. Well, you look at the data, and it's all due to one extraordinary 800-pound baby. So that 800-pound baby has high leverage. So no matter what's happening over here, the fact that 800-pound baby got assistance makes it a positive correlation. So, there are things going on in your data. Obviously, you clean that data up, and then the real picture will have a better chance of appearing. But even real data points can get in your way, and that's a more subtle distinction because it's distracting your, if you had you're building real estate in the area and you had, Sergey Brin moved to town or something like that, you wouldn't want income to be one of the things because whatever his house he bought would dominate the model because of the leverage of that data point. Even though it was a real value, it wasn't an outlier, it wasn't a mistake, it would have huge leverage, and you're not building houses for him. You have to, what are we doing this model for, and what is reflected in the data, and how is it showing the world? It's really important. So, sorry, I got a little excited about that question.
Earlier in your talk, you talked about one of the jobs of a data scientist is to define the problem. So what I'm wondering, the definition is a bit more solid than it was 2 years ago when I started here, but how would you define data science, especially contrasted with something like AI?
So data science is learning from known data with labeled outcomes, patterns that are useful for new data. So useful is important, known is important. And AI is mimicking humans to pretend you're doing something useful. So, sorry. They're very related. But anyway, it's a fun field to be in, and the exciting thing is we're always learning. And to do that, you have to be listening. So, do as much listening as talking, and you'll do well. Thank you, Don.
Very much appreciate it. So a couple of quick things. John has graciously agreed to stay around a bit, so I think if you have other questions, he'll be around during the day. Make sure you enter his number in, though, when you talk. He's looking to win, too, so just saying.
I got 5 kids to feed.
Exactly. So I think we've got food and beverages here. We're going to take a break for a little bit. We're going to come back at 10:30, okay? So we'll take a break until 10:30. Thanks very much. Thanks again, John.
Thank you.
Good job.
Thanks. It's fun.